Once you've installed and unpacked Web Connection into a folder, the CW Connect folder by default, you can run the setup program to configure the sample application that comes with Web Connection. When you start up setup.exe, it pops up a help file that takes you through these steps that I'm going to show you here. One thing that you need to do before you can actually install is you need to make sure that the web server that you're trying to install on is already installed. So you need to have either IIS, Apache, or IIS Express installed on the machine. I recommend you use IIS proper just because it makes it easier to run applications while nothing else is running. So in order to configure IIS, you can go to Windows Features, and you can go to the Internet Information Services section there, and you can drill down into there to set some of the options. The most important ones that you need to set are the IIS 6 Metabase compatibility functionality. And then you need to also make sure that the application development features are installed. So the most important ones here are ASP.NET and ISAPI extensions. Okay, then also for security, you need to make sure that basic security and Windows authentication are installed. There's a full topic in the help file and the online documentation that shows you exactly what settings are recommended to be set. And I recommend you take a look at that before you go here to start installation. So in my case, the web server is installed, and I'm going to install to IIS proper. So then I'm going to select a custom site. So I'm not going to go to my default site, but I'm going to select a different site to install to. So I'm going to go click OK to that and then go to the next page. And here I can basically set up where I want my samples to be installed. Now, I recommend you leave those at the default just because it's going to work a little bit smoother that way. Okay, so then we go let her rip, and you get a few prompts for other things that it wants to install. For example, it wants to install the Ghost script driver and a PDF PostScript driver so that you can print to PDF. It wants to install a Visual Studio extension, which is already installed, so I get an error here, and I can just dismiss that. And then it's done, and it gives us a summary that tells us where things installed and how you can get to it. It will also want you to create a shortcut on the desktop so that you can very quickly launch your application in the right folder with the right dependencies and paths set up already. So I recommend you do this, so you say yes, and then that desktop shortcut gets created. So then a browser window pops up, and it pops you up into that application that was created. So this is a bunch of samples that come with Web Connection 6. They're pretty sparse right now because this is a beta. So they're kind of just enough to get you started to see that the application is running. So if you click on the Hello World link, you should see the Hello World program come up here. Then there's also a Show Albums and Albums listing that you can drill into, and you can look at the details. And then you can also look at the page list, so you can page through this list of albums. And this is all server-side code that is just demonstrating some functionality. Okay, so this is all working. The next thing that we want to do is create a new project. And I can do this by typing do console into the Foxborough command window. When I do that, the Web Connection Management console comes up, and you can create a new project from that location. So when I click on this button here, a new project wizard pops up, and in this window I need to specify a project name. So this is the PJX file and exe file that gets generated. So I'm going to call this one web test. And then I also need to give it a process name, which is an actual process class that will handle requests. So one project can contain multiple process classes, so you can have multiple operationally isolated classes that can handle requests. So I'm going to call this one Web Process. It's not very innovative, of course, but for demo purposes, this is very clear. Okay, then again, I need to specify my web server. And in this case, I'm going to, again, choose my custom website here. And then we come to the second page where we basically need to specify where do we want to create this project, what will be the name of the virtual directory that is created, and this is all fine. And then choose a script map that will be used to route requests to this particular process class. And the way that this works is that we have an extension that maps to a particular class and the methods inside of that class. So when you have a page name called helloworld.wp, for example, it will then route to the web test class, web process class, and call the hello world method in there. Okay, so then we go next and we let it go. So it's going to go ahead and create a new project for us. And When it's done, it brings up the sample page and again, a help file, a help topic here that we don't need to look at. It creates a project for us if we're running the full version of Web Connection. And then in order to run this, I can just say do web test, which is the name of the project, and then main.prg, which is the actual main program that I can run. And that's our Web Connection server running again. Now, what was actually created here on disk is a project folder that contains a deploy folder and a web folder. So the deploy folder is the source code folder. And this is the folder where all the related application-related code goes. So as you notice here, if you've used Web Connection before, the only things that are in this folder are the things that are specific to this project. Everything else is actually referenced via paths. So Web Connection actually lives in a separate directory in a different folder, which is referenced on the path. So this project structure is very self-contained, and it essentially makes sure that everything is portable within the application. So we have our source code in the deploy folder, and the web folder holds all the web assets. So there's a default page that we saw, and then there's also any of the resources that we want to create later. So a new Web Connection project also creates a views folder. And inside of this views folder, there is a number of templates here that essentially give you some blank pages that you can start with. So a layout page is a script page that you can use as a master page for a project. So this is sort of like the main template of a page that you can load other content into. And so we'll see this in a little bit, but these template pages essentially provide you a blueprint that you can work from and that you can create applications with that look a little bit nicer rather than starting from scratch. So let's see what this actually looks like. So we have our server running, and in order to actually check it out, I'm going to start Visual Studio here. Now, Visual Studio is not required to do any of this, but Visual Studio provides you with some templates that we provide you, and that makes things a little bit easier when you're creating an application. So I'm going to actually open this project here. I'm going to go website, and I'm going to open that folder that we created. So the Web Connection projects, web tests, which is the project, and then the web folder, which is the actual folder that contains the web application. So I'm going to open that. And if we go to the HTML page, I can just right click here and say view in browser. It should actually open the application. Okay, so it uses IIS Express at this point because the project is actually configured for IIS Express. Now, this will all work, but if I want to use IIS proper, I can actually go into the properties here. Okay, there we go. I bring up the start options, and I can go in here and change the URL to a custom server, and I can say HTTP localhost web test. So that's the location of our application. So this is the base URL for our site. I'm going to apply that. And again, if I go view in browser now, we should come up with our default page here. And so our server is not running at the moment. So I'm going to go to the desktop real quick. And I'm going to bring up the web test shortcut from the desktop. So if I do web test main here, bring up the browser, and then hit the hello world link, and voila, we have a request that actually fired from Web Connection. Now, just to clarify how this works, what we're saying is we're hitting the test page and the WP extension. As I mentioned earlier, the WP extension maps to the web process class that we created. And inside of there is a test page method that gets fired. So this method here exists in this test. And so if I want to say time is plus time and saving that and rerunning it, if we run this now, we should see the changed value. Here's our updated value. So we've just made a change in Foxborough and responded back and showed that value inside of the application. When you bring up these pages, you notice that they're using some specific styling. These pages are designed with Bootstrap and a modified scheme that is used to render these pages. And these pages are customizable. There's a number of templates that control how all the dynamic pages that are using basic styling can be adjusted globally within the application. So if we actually go over into our views folder here in the web application, we see that there's a number of pages that exist. There's a page footer template, a page header template, a page template, and these can be used from within process classes to render a header and a footer really quickly. If you're building entire pages, there's now the concept of layout pages, which are sort of master pages into which you can load other content within. These templates can be modified and they can be then applied globally. So for example, the page over here uses the page header template, which is the default that is used for some of the code-based examples. So some of the things you can do inside of here is, for example, if I would like to see a slide out menu on the right, I can take out this no slide out menu class, CSS class from the stylings. And I can go in and say, instead of web connection, we want the name of the page to be web test. So if I change this now and go back over into web connection, I have to stop the server when I change one of these master templates because they are cached. And then if I go back to the browser now and reload the page should look a little bit different. So we've basically affected the page header template, and we've changed the text up here for the header, as well as being able to now bring out a slide out menu here that comes in from the right. These pages use Bootstrap, as I mentioned, and so they are also mobile capable, so you can resize these pages down to smaller sizes and they should look okay. As long as you follow the Bootstrap guidelines, you should be able to build applications that look great on mobile devices fairly easily, and we'll see more of that in future screencasts that I'll have. So let's add some functionality to this application by adding a method to the web process class. So I'm going to add a method here. I'm going to call it customer list. I took the liberty of adding a customers table to this example, and we're going to query that data from here. I also cheated a little bit, and I'm going to paste some text into this page here so that we don't have to type all this stuff out. So the first thing that happens here is that there's a query against the database. I'm querying that customers table, and I'm pulling out the company, first name, and last name, and I'm formatting the names in a certain way so that they actually show up with spaces inside of them. So there's a short date, so there's a UDF function I'm calling for the date to display the date in a nicer format than the default format, and we run this query into a cursor called tQuery. So right now, for argument's sake, we're just going to run this request first to make sure that it works, and then we'll add the data a little bit later. So in order to display some information here, we could write at any point in time, we can always say response.write and write some raw text out. So any application, if you just want to go in and say basically response.write, customer list goes here, and return, and if you run this and bring up the browser, that's what you see. You see the raw output that was actually sent from the client. So while this works, this is pretty tedious if you have to do this manually. So what we're going to do is instead we're going to rely on some helpers. So earlier we talked about the templates, right? We were modifying the page header template, and you can actually use the process class or this to retrieve that page header template and embed it into a page. Next, I'm going to create some HTML that is actually the header text. So this will be the text that we display here. So I'm using a header text, page header text CSS class to make the text appear like a bold text. And then I'm going to use a font awesome icon, the list icon, and embed it into the page. And the way that we use font awesome icons is by simply using an I tag, so an italic, and specifying that the class is a font awesome class, and then specifying the icon with FA dash the name of the icon. And what is font awesome? A font library that essentially has 500 icons embedded inside of it, and you can use these fonts as simple CSS classes in your code. So what's nice about this is, first of all, you get access to all of these icons that are available, which is awesome, right? And that's why it's called font awesome. But icons are also really easy to use. So if you want to apply a color to an icon, all you have to do is set the style to a certain color. If you want to make the icon bigger, it will automatically scale to the bigger size. So it's very useful to use icons, and Font Awesome makes that very easy. So Font Awesome is automatically loaded in Web Connection by the default templates, unless you change that. And so it's always going to be available to you. So when we're running our code over here, we're using the FA list icon, and we'll see what that looks like in just a second. And then for now, we'll just put a placeholder in here, and we say the data should go here. Okay, so then we also call response.write again. And so this is the raw response.write output that we can dump data into. So what we're taking the text that we captured in this text merge block here, and we're simply embedding it here. The text that you generate here could be anything. So we can use a plain string, or any way you want to generate a string, you can use that to embed that data inside of here. And then we'll call process.page footer template, or again, this could be this. I like to use process because then I can get some IntelliSense, whereas this does not provide me the IntelliSense. Okay, so we haven't loaded any data just yet. We run the query, but we're not actually displaying it. But let's see whether the page works and how we actually can access it. So let's run web test main, and let's go back into the browser, and let's go over to our customer list page. So here's the customer list as we left it. But now if we render it, we should see that actually show up. And whoops, we got an error. Okay, so I did something wrong here, and instead of LC HTML, I used LC text. So you can see here the process involved in developing. We're using FoxPro, just like we always do, and we get to use the debugger just like you always do against a web request. So let's reload, and there's my customer list now. So as you can see, we get the same formatting that we had on that standard page, and we get the same functionality in this page here as we had before. Because we're pulling in the page header template and the page footer template, we get all that default content automatically. And as I said before, we can customize that content now much more easily than we could in previous versions of Web Connection. So this is one of the really nice new features in Web Connection 6. Okay, so let's see how we can get the data in here. And I don't want to be too expansive because this is supposed to be relatively short, but let's go ahead and let's use, let's take this out here. So instead of embedding it right inside of here, let's do the following. Let's say response.write, and we can use a helper function that lives in the www.html helpers library. And I'm going to use the HTML data grid to simply render the output from the tQuery cursor into a string, and then response write that out. So let's see what we get with that. So HTML data grid, and we're writing it out to the response object. And if all goes well, there's our list of customers displayed in a list. Pretty nice, huh? So if we want to be a little bit more interesting with this and maybe go in and customize this request, maybe make a link for this, I can use another helper function called href, so that creates an href link, and I can say customer.wp !id equals, and then plus the ID for the cursor. So that is my link that I'm sending, and then the text that I want to send is going to be the company, and then I want to display that as company. Okay, so I am going to run this again, and if we run this again now, we should see that here we get our linked list. And then we can go in and click, and at this point we get an error page that gets displayed that tells us that the customer.wp page does not actually exist. So at this point you would go on and create a method that displays the customer record. So for example, you could use the HTML record function to generate a list of all the fields that exist in a particular field. My goal here isn't to give you a complete tour of Web Connection, but just to give you kind of a starter. So what I've shown you here so far is the ability to use code to generate HTML output and embed it into the page. This hasn't changed very much, but as you can see, we do get some additional functionality with these templates that make everything look more consistent and give you the ability to customize the look and feel. You could go a lot further with this, of course, using just coded FoxPro code to generate your HTML. So you could use HTML record, for example, to display the record information. But as you are building applications, it gets tedious really quickly. So I don't even want to spend a whole lot more time on showing you how you can do this all in code, but rather point you in the right direction for using templates and scripts instead. So let's take a look and see how we do that. So the idea behind this is that we, rather than using code to generate HTML, we can use pages and create HTML markup inside of an HTML editor of some sort. So we don't have to maintain code in order to generate HTML. So let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and create a new page, and by pressing Control N and creating a new page in my project here. So what you'll see here is that Web Connection 6.0 has a number of new templates that are available. So there's a Web Connection template page. There's a Web Connection template layout page, which is sort of a master page into which you can embed other templates. And there's a template content page, which is one of those pages that you would embed into a layout page. So a layout page gives you the ability to build reusable content. In a lot of applications, the main content, the outline of a page essentially, never changes or rarely changes with just a few things. And most of the stuff is the same. So you can reuse one page to manage that content. You can have multiple layout pages, so you can have different areas of your applications that use different layout pages. But overall, that mechanism is meant to give you a lot more reusability. Then Web Connection 6.0 also introduces partial pages, which allows you to create components essentially that you can reuse in multiple places. So sidebars, alert boxes, login components, things like that, they are really well placed into partial components that you can embed into a page. So let's see, first of all, how to create a basic template page, or a script page rather, that we can use to display our customer list. So I'm going to change this here to customerlist.wp. So I'm using the same name as our request to describe the page that I'm going to create. So this creates a template page. And this is a page that is generated by one of the Visual Studio templates that ship with Web Connection. So these are different than the templates that we looked at previously, but they use the same overall format. So if you customize the page templates in the view folder here, that's separate from what we're dealing with in this particular page. So each one of these script pages, if you use the plain template page, you'll get a page that is custom every time, and you have to change it every time. So every time we come in here, we have to change this logo 1 to Westwind Web Test, or change the no slide menus and take the no slide menu out so that we can render the slide out menu from the left. So if we're in here, we can now embed content inside of here. So if I just put a break here and I can say the time is, and so these are two FoxPro functions that I'm embedding as expressions into the page. So if we go ahead now and run this, we should still see the customer list, because even though we've created this new customer list page, we're still running the code that is actually executing in our class. So if we go in here and we set a breakpoint, we should see that the code still stops and lets us step through here, right? So we can step through this code and execute just like we always do in FoxPro. Okay, so what we need to do in order to render our template is abandon this code. So I'm going to return, and instead we can call into one of the functions of the response object, which is expand script or expand template. Those are the two functions that are available there. So expand script and expand template are very similar. They both allow you to have external templates that get evaluated with expressions inside of them. Scripts are more complex. They allow you the ability to use embedded code blocks that understand block statements like if statements that are nested, whereas templates only evaluate expressions or code blocks. So each individual expression or code block is an entity on its own, whereas in an expand script, everything is a fluid piece of code. In fact, an expand script template is converted into a FoxPro piece of PRG file. So that's a PRG file that is actually executed and runs at full speed of FoxPro. Okay, so if we run this again now, we should see a different page here with these two expressions that we embedded inside of that. So there's your FoxPro code running inside of a template. Pretty cool, right? So we have some code that executes first in FoxPro, and then that code, after it's done executing, it can pass forward information into the page. What do I mean pass forward? Well, instead of these expressions, we can take this out and we can go back and actually say HTML data grid tQuery, and that information is available here. Also, if you go into the code over here and you create any variables that are private, For example, I can go in here and say PC error message equals all's well here. And if we go render that over here, maybe we'll do this in an H3. We say PC error message. So if we render that and then we render the grid below that, it's going to look a little funky, but we should be able to. So here's my all's well here, and there's my grid. So this is data that we've passed forward because the data is still open and still available. And this is a private variable which is visible inside of the script, and we can access it. You can also put code blocks inside of here. So instead of, since this is a script, I can actually create variables in this page. So I can say lc output equals hello world. And then I can also create full code blocks. ln x equals 1 to 10. And we can actually output then here ln x. Oops, I gotta make that an expression. And then lc output. And let's see here, let's put a BR in there. So if we run this again, we should see, so this works. We can have code blocks directly inside of the page. Now, I don't recommend you do this very much unless you really need to. I prefer to have my code in the code behind. So rather than generating code here, you should generate output into strings or some other mechanism that you can display inside of the page rather than running code directly inside of this page. So then we can also do this for the customer page. So we didn't have that before. So I'm going to create another template page and I'm going to call it customer.wp. And when we create that, notice here we have to go in and make the changes. Westwind, web test. So that's a little bit distracting, and I'll show you the workaround for this. And then here I'm going to say HTML record tQuery, and then we're going to create a query directly in this page. And I'm going to cheat for this one. I'm going to go over to FoxPro, and I'm going to pick up a snippet here. Go back over here, paste this in here. So what we're doing here is we're running a query to select all the fields from the customer record where the ID matches the request query string, which is the ID value that we have on the URL here. So when we click here, if you look in the status bar there, you can see that there is an ID that is attached that happens to be a string. So when we go there, we get an ID here, and that's the ID we want to pick up. Okay, so this code hasn't been saved yet, but it should run at this point. If I save this and now reload this page, we should see that record actually show up. Huh? Pretty cool. So you can also customize this. So this is an HTML record list. So you can go first name, last name, entered. And if you run this again, then we only get those particular fields displayed. So that's how you can control the list in this case. Okay, so at this point, we've seen templates, and that's really useful. You can do a lot of cool stuff with these things. But one of the things that really is new in Web Connection 6 is the ability to use layout pages. So let's demonstrate how we do this and why we would want to do this. As I mentioned, when we created these two pages, these two template pages, we had to make changes for all the things that we wanted to be consistent in these two pages. And that's a lot of work every time you create a new page. So let's delete these two pages. And rather than using the template pages, let's go in and use a Web Connection template content page. So again, I'm going to create customer list.wp. And what it's doing here is it's referencing a layout page that acts as a master page for this page. So this content that we're generating in this page is going to get rendered into the layout page. So I can set the title here, and I can set the title here. And in here now, I can put my HTML data grid and tQuery. Okay, so now we're not repeating ourselves. So if I go to the layout page here, and we look down, so it says here Westwind Web Connection. Well, we want to change that to test, and we do want the slide menu. So now we're making that change once, but we'll be able to reuse that by any page that uses this particular layout page. Okay, so if I rerun this now, whoops, if we go back to the customer list. So here's my customer list now. And just to be clear that we're in the layout page here, let me put a few extra characters in there. So this is the layout page, right? So this comes from the layout page, and this is from the content page. So we're embedding content into two different pages, and our content page is much simpler to deal with. We have a much smaller bit of HTML that we need to worry about. And the repeatable stuff, the stuff that is the same for a lot of other pages, can always be loaded from this central page. So you make a change in the layout page, it's reflected in all the child pages. So let's create the child page. Let's create the customer page. So customer.wp, and that's the customer. And so here we want the % equals HTML data grid, right? We wanted the record here. tQuery. And here we had the HTML. Now, instead of doing this, I'm going to go into Web Connection here, and I'm going to actually create a method for this customer. So this code worked before, right? I mean, it worked with our customer list. We were able to see a customer record. And the reason for this is that Web Connection is actually smart. It realized that there was no method and went out and looked for a customer.wp page on disk, found it, and then rendered that page internally. But what I really want to do is keep this stuff isolated so that I don't put a bunch of code into my page. So I'm going to create a customer method in my class, and I'm going to call response.expandScript. So it's going to do that. And again, I'm going to go to my snip here and pull out my code, my query code. And then if tally is smaller than 1, PC error message equals no matching customer found. And then here we say PC error message equals blank, and I guess we need an end if. Okay, so if we run this again, just for the hell of it, let's print PC error message. Okay, so if we run this, I guess we go in here. We don't see the error message because there's nothing to do there. But if we do put an invalid ID in, then it shows up as no matching customer. Okay, so now we've seen master pages or layout pages and content. Now let's one more thing we can do here. Let's create a partial page. So let's go create another template page here, and I'm going to call it alert.wp. And I'm going to remove everything out of here, really. And I'm going to create a div tag and a class equals alert warning. So this is bootstrap stuff. And basically, this is an alert dialog. And so then we put inside of here the PC error message. Now, this is not safe because in some cases, there may not be a PC error message. So what we can do is we can say if var type PC error message equals C and not empty PC error message, then go ahead and render that. Otherwise, do nothing. So this means that if we don't have an error message, we don't actually render this particular component, and we don't see an empty box without any text inside of it. So this will render a yellow list. And so if we do this again, we can now reference this partial here in our customer list. So instead of this PC error message right here, what we can do is we can say render partial, and then it's the path to alert.wp. Okay, so if we render this again, we should now see the alert box pop up. Okay, great. So if we take an ID that is valid, so if we bring up this guy, there's no alert box, but if we go and put an invalid ID in, then again, we see the alert box. Includes the short Web Connection video on Web Connection 6.0. This wasn't meant to be a full-featured introduction. It was more meant to show you some of the features in Web Connection 6.0 that are new, so that those of you that are existing users can kind of get a feel of what functionality is available and what you can look at to check out Web Connection 6.0. We will follow this up with more detailed videos. I'm hoping to create a number of small videos that highlight specific features rather than these longer videos that we've been doing. And so you can look forward to that. And once Web Connection 6.0 ships, there will also be additional documentation that is currently somewhat lacking. And that's part of the reason we're releasing this video at this point. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you on the message board or maybe at Southwest Fox. Thanks.